Julian Assange being one who hasn't been extradited, but he is a political prisoner of the United States. If it weren't for the U.S., there would be no Julian Assange imprisonment, right? He wouldn't be facing what he's facing, extradition, if it weren't for the U.S. So Julian Assange being one, but we also have to think about people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, Sundiata Kohli, Leonard Peltier, dozens of others who remain behind prison walls for their political activity, for their commitment to liberation, Black liberation, Indigenous liberation, over the last half century plus, right? There are still many people like Mumia Abu-Jamal rotting in prisons that Joe Biden refuses to pardon, despite the fact that there's overwhelming evidence in almost every one of these cases, if not all of them, that the charges were trumped up against them, that the court system, the intelligence agencies like the FBI through their counterintelligence program were pursuing a coordinated campaign to imprison activists such as Mumia Abu-Jamal at that time. And that campaign continues into today, because every time they go up for parole, these police unions and their friends in intelligence come together and pressure the courts, the state courts especially, to abide by their diktats, which is to kill these activists and show people an example of what will happen to you if you do the wrong thing, which the wrong thing here, quote unquote, is defined as standing up for liberation, fighting for your people, for the exploited, for the oppressed, right? Standing up to racism, capitalism, imperialism, exploitation, and saying no more. We're going to build something else, and we're going to build the rudiments of that in the Black Panther Party, the American Indian movement, right? That is what is at stake here, and that's why Joe Biden won't pardon them, because he is a mass incarcerator in chief. He is crime bill Joe Biden, and he, more so than perhaps anyone else, embodies this mass incarceration state, that has developed over generations, which is an internal reflection of the military state that has been built up astronomically since the Vietnam War. But of course, we know that the United States has been a warfare state since the very beginning. People may not know that the United States' Department of quote unquote defense was the Department of War for so long. That only changed during this Cold War, right, that the U.S. launched, which required a public relations switch, a sort of shift, because there was concern that some of the ways, of course, that the U.S. conducted war would be seen as racist and would be seen as imperialist, and that would then degrade the U.S.'s standing in the overall international situation, where the U.S. was jockeying with the Soviet Union and other socialist countries for influence and ultimately for domination. So it's a Department of War, and that is what the censorship is all about. That is what the continued imprisonment is all about. These political prisoners are prisoners of war. They're prisoners of the war that happens right here in the United States on working people, on oppressed people each and every day. It's so important that we continue to make that connection between the sanctions on Russia and the blowback, as we have been doing here, because there needs to be more connections made between how domestic politics, the domestic developments that we see, whether it's around police brutality or economic exploitation and the like, how these developments transpire and develop ultimately reflect what the U.S. is doing abroad. Right? Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The bombs that explode abroad come right back home and explode. The bombs dropped abroad come right back home and explode, on working people." And so that's what's happening right now. And the Russia situation is just I think the most direct way to link those two things, because the United States continues to pump weapons into Ukraine, enforce these suicidal sanctions, Europe the same, and it's coming back to working people in terms of really damaging economic conditions, incredible price hikes. I mean, the inflation is through the roof. People do not know how they're going to make it. There's much more instability than ever, even among people who are higher earners among working people than say others. But I mean, it is a real dire situation right now. And so while Pepe Escobar he called it nihilism, but I think this is just realistic analysis, a materialist analysis of the situation. And that analysis, that materialist analysis, now needs to be put into action. Now we need to continue to spread the word, get out the word, educate our communities, build organizations, all of that in order to move to this new phase, join in on this decoupling from imperialism that's happening quite organically, not in some sort of this is some sort of political movement, but it really is an objective phenomenon that we can join into, so long as we're not dragged down by bourgeois politics, especially in the form of the Democratic Party. That is what is, I think, the Achilles heel of the entire quote unquote progressive and left movement. It's the Democratic Party still being seen in this lens of, okay, how do we maneuver? How do we reform it? How do we make the best of this? Even if there is much less than ever, and I think to a lesser extent than ever, faith that the Democratic Party will actually change things. But no, there's still this, I think, hope that if you can fight the Democrats the right way, if you can maneuver around them the right way, support the right people, creates a certain kind of conflict in the Democratic Party, that you're going to get what you want. The Democratic Party has put up the levers, the walls that it needs to ensure that that conflict is likely not to transpire. At least that's my opinion, right? I had some hopes in 2016, less so in 2020, that this kind of new trend, right? The Sandernistas, as we called them at Black Agenda Report, this new trend of sort of social democratic thinking and universal health care and student loan relief, all of that stuff coming to the fore, right? Green New Deal, that could create a split in the Democratic Party. Now, I don't believe that that's going to happen. It's going to happen like that. I think the split will only occur when those a significant number of so-called Sandinistas, whatever squad sort of followers, those folks decouple themselves from the Democrats and see that this is just not the party for them. And that, I think that's the only way that that split really occurs, because the individuals, right, the Sanderses, the AOCs, the Elon Omars, they're not going to break from the Democrats, and they will defend the Democrats in key ways to ensure that the movement remains weak. And that's not necessarily some kind of agenda that they're conspiring. That's just the nature, the character of their role, that they have chosen a particular career and they have succeeded in that particular career. And now they are going to try to hold on to that success within the already existing political structure.